Welcome to Revive. We're so glad to have you visiting our YouTube channel, and we cannot wait to connect with you. Jason and Katie here from Revive Church, and we're looking forward to meeting you.
Yeah, if you would like to get connected, please head to our website, www.revive.online. There are so many different ways that you can be a part of this community.
Good morning, everybody. Why don't you take your seats? Great to see you in the 9 o'clock service. I must say thank you to the one solitary person. It was the smallest thing. You probably didn't hear it, but when it was announced that I was speaking, there was a tiny woo. And I thank you. I appreciate that. It gives me incredible confidence when I come up here and know that there's a little woo over there. Yeah. Too little, too late. Okay. Anyway, I'm looking forward. Our series is on the 10 Commandments. Can I say that I can't remember this church ever spending 2 months preaching on the 10 Commandments. But then again, I've only been here 66 years. So I think the opportunity that we're taking to do this over the next couple of months is fantastic. And so my privilege today is to speak about the 4th commandment, about keeping the Sabbath. Okay, now the woo, I agree. When I saw that my name was with this one, I wooed as well. Can I say that this is not a statement that's complaining. I love every opportunity I get here. But 9 other commandments are clearly retaught in the New Testament. But this one, not clear. And so there's a lot of, ambiguity about this subject matter. In fact, if you go onto YouTube and you just type in the Sabbath day, you're going to get Christian theologians from 2 lines of thought saying, yes, the Sabbath day, the 7th day of the week, the Saturday, God instituted that we keep that holy and separated, and that's what we should do. And then you got, on the other hand, you got the fact of other people saying, no, we don't have to keep the Sabbath, or we don't have to keep it the way it was in the Old Testament. And so I'm sure that whatever I say now might not have agreement with everyone. But you know what? I'm okay with that. Are you okay with that? And I think there are some things in the Word that are so clear and so plain, but there's other things that you just dig a little bit to sort of find those nuggets of gold. And so we're going to do a bit of digging this morning. Is that okay? Can we do that? And so we're going to have a look at this subject matter, the Sabbath day. You would think after 2,000 years, our Christian theologians could all get on the same page about this topic, but they don't. And so why don't we have a look at what the commandment was in Exodus 20. It says, remember to observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. You have 6 days each week for your ordinary work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath day of rest dedicated to the Lord your God. On that day, no one in your household may do any work. This includes you, your sons and daughters, your male and female servants, your livestock, and any foreigners living among you. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and everything in them. But on the 7th day he rested. That is why the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and set it apart as holy. Now, if we have a look at the New Testament, let's try and find out what can we glean, what can we gather? Well, we know that Jesus' custom, the Bible says in the New Testament, was to go to the synagogue on the Sabbath. That means every Saturday, the 7th day of the week, Jesus went to the synagogue. Now, surely, if that's what Jesus did, if that's what he's modeled, surely we should do what Jesus does. I mean, what would Jesus do? JD. And so in the book of Acts, it also states that the Apostle Paul, his custom was to go to the synagogue on the Sabbath. But it seems that he went for a different purpose. He loved using those opportunities to reason with the scriptures about Jesus Christ. But we see both Jesus and the Apostle Paul, their custom was to go to the synagogue on the Sabbath. Yet after the resurrection of Jesus, it seems that the strict observance of the commandments seemed to be diminished in its importance. Now we've got to understand the Old Testament, when it says you've got to observe the Sabbath, it had commands about what you can and can't do. And in fact, there was a death penalty if you didn't observe the Sabbath. And so a guy, the Bible states, was out picking up wood on the Sabbath day. He was stoned. So we're coming from something that the Old Testament is saying, this is really important. And we come into the New Testament and it seems to be diminished in its importance. And so, I think it's important that we have a look and to understand why has there been a change, especially after Jesus' resurrection. Now, some people believe that Jesus abolished all the requirements of the law. After all, the Bible says in Galatians 5:18, but if you are led by the Spirit, you are not under the law. So why bother with any of the 10 commandments if we're not under the law? Why are any of them important? And so Pastor Jason last week did a great introductory explanation of the importance of the commandments. And if you weren't here last week or you didn't hear the message, I recommend you to go to our YouTube channel and just have a look at that sermon. It was really good about how we should view the 10 Commandments today. Now, the Christian church today views the 10 Commandments as a timeless moral foundation established by God that reflects His will for each of us today. And so we need to make really clear, keeping the 10 Commandments doesn't earn you salvation. Okay, so it can't do that, but still it's important. And so it's a guide for Christian living. We know that when Jesus was asked, what's the most important command? He said in Matthew 22, 37 to 39, Jesus replied, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. A second is equally important, love your neighbor as yourself. The 10 Commandments is a moral code that actually embraces how to love God and how to love your neighbor. So it's really important. And so a society that is built on these timeless principles will thrive. But still, it's not answering the question about keeping the Sabbath, the seventh day of the week, a Saturday. I mean, let's face it, what day is today? Sunday. What are you doing here on a Sunday? And it seems like already we've made a decision that we think Sunday's okay. It doesn't have to be Saturday. But do you know why you've made that decision? I mean, isn't it more important that we're biblical than traditional? Are we doing something just out of tradition, or is there a biblical understanding as to why we're not meeting on a Saturday? And so, Jesus and the law. Someone might say, didn't Jesus abolish the law? He didn't abolish it, he fulfilled it. And we need to again understand the law cannot make anyone righteous. And so it's no good at doing that. In fact, the more laws you know about, the more unworthy you know you are, because you're breaking more. So it's like all these laws are just showing you can't keep it. And so the purpose of the law is an arrow pointing to Jesus Christ. And we've got to understand then, why did things change after the resurrection of Jesus Christ? And so that's what we're going to dig in and have a look today. When Tracy and I went to Israel, we were there for 8 weeks. So we were a bit shocked when it got to the Sabbath. That starts from Friday evening and it ends at Friday evening at sunset to Saturday evening at sunset. That's when just everything shuts down. And we were ill prepared. And so we wanted to get to a church that was meeting on the Saturday, not the Sunday. No buses, no taxis, no trams, no light rail, nothing. And the church we wanted to get to was kilometres away. So we had to walk all those kilometres to get to church. When we were leaving church, we were getting hungry. No food outlets, no shops, nothing open. Thankfully, we found a cinema and a time zone sort of set up, obviously run by Gentiles. And we were able to find something to eat in on the Sabbath. And while we were there, we went and watched a movie as well. Okay, but for a Torah-observing Jew, one that adheres to the commandments set out in the first 5 books of the Old Testament, there are a lot of restrictions on the Sabbath day. And I don't think we truly understand what it means to keep the Sabbath. We're sort of saying keep the Sabbath, and it's like, do you know what it's like to keep the Sabbath? Let me give you an idea. The Bible mentions a number of things that are prohibited to be done on the Sabbath day. But this list has actually been added to by something called the Mishnah, which is sort of like the writings or the oral teachings of the rabbis over the many, many years of how to keep the law. So if there's 613 commandments in the Bible, they've added many, many more. And what they do, they call it, we're putting a fence around the Torah. So not only are we going to keep the law, we're not going to do things that might even look like we're breaking the law. And so that can be a little bit confusing. And so let me tell you some of the categories of what you cannot do on the Sabbath day. There's no sowing, ploughing, reaping, binding, threshing, winnowing, grinding, sifting, kneading, baking, shearing, bleaching, dyeing, spinning, weaving, separating, tying a knot, untying a knot, sewing, tearing, writing, erasing, building, demolishing, lighting a flame, extinguishing a flame. That's just some of the restrictions. So you can't do that on the Sabbath. Now, in addition to those restrictions, because of the present modern world, they've had to keep updating the things that you're restricted of doing. So let me tell you some of the things you should not do on the Sabbath. You cannot add fresh water to a vase of flowers. That's sowing. You cannot make up a bouquet of flowers. That's making a sheaf. You cannot separate good fruit from spoiled fruit. That's winnowing. You cannot brush dried mud from your boots. That's grinding. You cannot cut your hair or nails. That's shearing. Hey, women, what about this one? You cannot apply makeup. That's dyeing. You cannot braid your hair. That's weaving. You cannot use soap in such a way that it lathers. That's rubbing. You cannot paint, draw, or type. That's writing. You cannot open an umbrella. That's classed as building. You cannot smoke a cigarette. That's kindling a fire. You cannot switch on any electrical switch, such as lights, ovens, elevator buttons, road crossings. That's kindling a fire. You cannot switch off any electrical switch. That's extinguishing a fire. Now, in regards to the use of electricity, most apartments in Israel have what they call Shabbat elevators. And that means you don't have to press the buttons, because on the Sabbath, you just step in and it'll stop at every level. So you're not allowed to press the button to tell which one to stop. And so Shabbat elevators. In the past, Jewish families used to employ a non-Jew to be in their household to do all the things that they're not allowed to do. Now, sometimes if you can't afford a non-Jew to work for you at home, you can just hope that you're next to a Gentile neighbor and they can do a couple of things for you. But most Jewish homes have a proliferation of electronic timers so that things will go on and off on the Sabbath when they want it to go on and off. Now, the Sabbath is meant to be a day of rest. This sounds exhausting and very legalistic. And so when we're talking about keeping the Sabbath, go and see what it's like to be in a community of people that say, we will keep this to the letter. And so this is sort of what the Sabbath meant and how important they believed that this is holy. And so this is what we need to do. Now, this is not a reflection on Israelites or Jews or anything like that. What's beautiful to see on the Sabbath, the families getting together. They're not worried about any other thing. So there's a beautiful side to it. Don't get me wrong, but there's also this legalism and this exhaustion that happens up to that point. Jesus was accused of breaking the Sabbath on many times. He was healing the sick, he was picking grain to eat, and he was performing miracles. And so his response in Mark 2:27 was, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So in a sense, it's like the Sabbath is there to serve man, not man slavishly serving the Sabbath. And I think that list that I've given you, it sort of sounds like, boy, to keep this holy, boy, is it a lot of work that we're slavishly trying to keep the day Whereas Jesus says, no. The Sabbath was a gift from God for you, not the other way around. And so God intended the Sabbath to be a gift of rest and restoration rather than the burden of keeping strict rules. So let's talk about, just very quickly, Saturday versus Sunday. We're here on a Sunday. It seems like you've made your mind up. But on what basis have you made your mind up? And so we read in the New Testament about what the early church did. And they moved their get-togethers on a Sunday, the first day of the week. They did that to commemorate the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And it's like, wow, whenever we get together, we want to celebrate Jesus has risen again. So they moved their day from Saturday to Sunday. Communion and preaching took place on a Sunday. You see behind me a passage, Acts 27. On the first day of the week, not the seventh, on the first day of the week, we gathered with the local believers to share in the Lord's Supper. Paul was preaching to them, and since he was leaving the next day, he kept talking until midnight. How'd you like to have a meeting? Go to midnight. Yeah, don't worry, a guy fell out of the window. Was that the one? He fell out of the window, broke his neck. Anyway, he was raised from the dead. It was okay. Offerings were gathered on the Sunday. 1 Corinthians 16:2, on the first day of each week, you should each put aside a portion of the money you've earned. Don't wait until I get there and then try and collect it all at once. So Sunday. Sunday became known as the Lord's Day. Revelation 1:10, it was the Lord's Day and I was worshiping in the Spirit. Suddenly I heard behind me a loud voice like a trumpet blast. John, the apostle, gets his vision from God on Sunday, the Lord's Day. And also, and more importantly, the apostles' teaching seemed to downplay the importance of the Saturday Sabbath day. Romans 14:5, in the same way, some think one day is more holy than another, while others think every day is alike. You should each be fully convinced that whichever day you choose is acceptable. Can you note there? It's one day all day. It's not no day. Just enjoying the people that are watching us from home and glad that you've joined in with us. But if you can, if there's no reason for you to be there, come and celebrate with the community. Anyway, Colossians 2:16, it says, don't let anyone condemn you for what you eat or drink or for not celebrating certain holidays or new moon ceremonies or Sabbaths. For these rules are only shadows of the reality yet to come. And Christ himself is that reality. And so, if you're going to disregard such an important commandment, and if the apostles are saying, hey, listen, don't let anyone bother you about these things, just be convinced in your mind what you're doing. And anyway, that's a shadow pointing to Jesus Christ. How are we meant to wrestle with this and look at this? And so now, getting out our spiritual shovels, we're going to dig a little bit now. There's a difference between God's Sabbath rest and the Sabbath rest in the Ten Commandments. There's a difference. And I want to tell you how it's different. Let's go to the very beginning. God creates the earth in 6 days. On the 7th day, it says that he rested. And from his rest, he said, hey, this is a really good rhythm. 6 days, 1 day. I'm now going to put that in law. You're going to work for 6, but then you've got to have 1 day off, like I've had a day off. But the word rest is possibly not the best word to use. And most translations say God rested. My question is, did God get tired? Was creation too much for him? And he sort of was exhausted, sitting on his throne, just going, oh my goodness, that's the busiest 6 days I've ever had in my life. Whew. I've got to have a break. Angels, I've got to have a breather. And he's sort of there panting and because he needed rest. No. A better translation of the word is he ceased. 6 days you work and on the 7th, cease. Stop. And so I think the word rest, it doesn't work when you realize it's talking about God. He ceased. And so the word best translation means to cease, put an end to, and desist from labor. And so you've got to understand that God's Sabbath ceasing it was a forever ceasing. Did he the next day go back to the work of doing more creating? No. Set it all up. Complete. And so his Sabbath rest wasn't just for a day, it's a forever rest. And so he goes, look, okay, in the law, I want you to taste what I'm tasting forever. I want you to have a taste once a week. I want you to rest. And it's sort of like a gift to humanity and livestock. You know, it's a gift to them to go, you know, one day work will be over and this is what you're going to enjoy forever. But for the moment, just take one in 7. But God's Sabbath was a forever rest. He didn't go back to the work of creating. It was done and it was complete. And so one is the reality, God's forever Sabbath, and one is the shadow of that reality. So if the apostles are saying, you know, it's a shadow pointing to Christ. It's like a shadow is not the real thing. What's the reality of which the shadow is being cast? And so God's forever Sabbath is the reality, okay, because of what I've done at creation, but now the shadow is, okay, 1 out of 7, I want you to rest as well. But the next day, you get back to work. Now, there's a second forever Sabbath example. And so in Deuteronomy chapter 5, the 10 commandments are repeated again. But this time, when they repeat about keeping the Sabbath, they use a different reality casting the shadow. And it says, remember that you were once slaves in Egypt, but the Lord your God brought you out with his strong hand and powerful arm. That is why the Lord your God has commanded you to rest on the Sabbath day. And it's like, hold on a second. In Exodus 20, you said it was creation. Now you're saying it's deliverance from Egypt into the promised land. And so that's the forever Sabbath. So what you've got to understand is he delivered them from Egypt. That's like their 6 days of work. And he's spiritually trying to bring them into their promised land. And that's their time of rest. But again, when God granted them freedom from Egypt, and when he granted them possession of the land, that's a forever possession. That he didn't have to go, look, you can possess the land for a little bit. He goes, no, the title deed of this land is yours, and I'll never take it back. So the rest of the promised land, in God's mind, is a forever Sabbath. Like, I've completed. I've delivered you from Egypt. They'll never be over you again. And I've given you a land, and it will never be taken from you. Now we know, history tells us, of 2,000 years they were out of the land. But the title deed never changed. It was always theirs. And so again, there's this example of, I've made a decision. It's complete, and I've ceased on this one, and it's like forever, this land is Israel's. And so we've got the shadow and we've got the reality. There's a third forever Sabbath example, but now it's in the New Testament, and we're now getting closer to why we're meeting not on a Saturday. And it says, again, in Colossians 2:16, about don't let anyone condemn you, not celebrating those holidays. We've just looked at that, but look at the last bit. For these rules are only shadows of the reality yet to come. Christ himself is the reality. How is Christ the reality of these shadows? And so because of what Jesus has accomplished on the cross, the focus now shifts from a specific day of the week to a person, Jesus Christ. And so, what is it that Jesus finished? What is it that he ceased from? And we know that on the cross, he cried, "It is finished." The work of redemption complete. Us trying to fulfill the law to somehow satisfy the requirements of God, we'll never do it. And the law was always pointing, but one day, a Savior will come, pointing to Jesus Christ. And so on the cross, he completed redemption for humanity. And so as believers, we are in, and we've got to understand that after he said it is finished, and when he ascended to heaven, he sat down. And that means job done. And so there's this forever Sabbath of redemption. It's forever. He's finished. He's not coming back to go, oh, listen, you guys have stuffed up again. I better die again. You know, it's like, no, I've done what needs to be done. Redemption is done once and for all. And so in a sense, we are invited to take part of the Sabbath of that finished work of us trying to be right with God. We can cease from our labors forever. And as believers, we step into this Sabbath rest in Jesus Christ where I don't have to try and earn my salvation. I never can. He's done the work. He's my righteousness. And I can now live my life in the rest, in the ceasing of my struggle of trying to be right with God. I now am right with God. And I can rest in that knowledge. And it's not sort of, oh, look, I've sinned and I need to make right, whatever. No, there's a Sabbath rest that we enter into where we go, you know what? I know I'm not perfect, but I am the righteousness of Jesus Christ. What he has done, I have now made part of my life. And there's a rest. It's a Sabbath forever rest that we enter into. It says, just before I read, so for believers, the Sabbath is no longer linked to a day, it's linked now to the person of Jesus Christ. To put it probably bluntly, Jesus is our Sabbath rest. Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath, the Bible tells us. Hebrews 4:9-10 says, there remains then a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For anyone who enters God's rest, not the Ten Commandments rest. I want to enter God's forever rest. For anyone who enters God's rest also rests from their works, just as God did from his. Matthew 11:28-29, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. I'm gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. Isn't that wonderful? And so, meeting on a Sunday, in fact, if you're a shift worker, and that's why you're sitting at home watching this from home because, you know, of shift hours, it's like he has done something amazing that it's not attached to a day. Every day for me, I'm part of this rest. Every day. Spiritually, my work is done, or his work has released me from this perpetual trying to be right with God. So spiritually, as a believer, I've entered into Sabbath rest. I wake up on Monday, wake up on Tuesday. I'm in that place of rest. But I now want to talk about another aspect of the Sabbath day. Okay, that's fine spiritually, but what about for us physically and mentally? The Sabbath is actually a good rhythm of 6 days work, 1 day rest, or 1 day ceasing. And I want to look at this rhythm now. So I'm not worried about the day, but they still practice meeting together in the New Testament. So I'm not here to preach and go, look, every day is a Sabbath day. Hey, I don't care whether you come to church or not. See you later. Bye-bye. Doesn't matter. No. Spiritually, that's what he's done. But there's a purpose. And again, the Sabbath is a gift to us. And so it says in Hebrews 10:25, let us not neglect our meeting together as some people do, but encourage one another, especially now that the day of his return is drawing near. So you got the apostles going, okay, we're not worried about the Sabbath day. Some people think 1 day, all day. Just be convinced in your mind about what's right. But hey, I'll see you on Sunday at church. And it's like, have we just merely made Sunday another Sabbath? And so the Sabbath day concept wasn't totally abolished. It was reframed and reintroduced. Spiritually, we enjoy the benefits of forever Sabbath, but physically, we need to understand the rhythm that God put into creation when he did 6 days work, 1 day ceasing. He put that into creation itself. And so, for example, the Sabbath rhythm wasn't just for people. Remember we read it was for livestock? So it can't just be spiritual. Don't see the little lambs going, bah, worship Jesus on a day. No, they're animals. In fact, the law was to let the land have a Sabbath rest as well. Every 7 years, let the land rest. Don't do any more crops on the land. Now, agriculturally, we know that you've got to let the land replenish its nutrients. And every 7 years is a really good guide. And what it does, when you let the land rest, the very next crop that you plant, the harvest is better than the one just before the rest. It seems like the harvest diminishes, but you give it rest and then you get a good crop again. So God has put into creation, when it comes to land, when it comes to livestock, and when it comes to humans, he's put this rhythm of 6 days, but one day cease. 6 days work hard, but one day cease. And this rhythm is in creation itself. And so Harvard Medical School, they did a research and they confirmed the advantages of those that regularly observe this 6-1 rhythm of worship and rest. And so they did a study and they studied those who attended weekly religious services, and they found out that overall they had lower cortisol levels, so stress management was better, improved heart health and longer life expectancy. On average, people that came to weekly services once a week, they lived for 7 to 14 years longer than those who didn't. This is Harvard doing a study on this. They also found that the practice of pausing and worshiping helped restore balance to the nervous system, especially assisting those with anxiety issues. Now, we live in a busy world. It's full of demands. It demands our time and our attention. Work, family, timetables, pressures, obligations, restrictions. And so to work with God's 6-1 rhythm sometimes is really hard to do. And we go, look, you don't know how busy I am, but I'm telling you that when you work with the rhythm that he's somehow put into creation itself, it will be better for you. And so Exodus 28 says, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. So it's actually, there's something you've got to do to make this a really good day. One, it says remember it, and the other says you have got to keep it holy. So remember doesn't mean just a mental recollection. Doesn't mean that, today's the Sabbath. No. It means to observe and to commemorate. That means to take an action and go, you know what? I am setting aside a day where I'm going to cease from all the other things I do on the 6 days, and I'm going to do the stuff that's good for me. And it's a day for God to refresh me, to restore me, to rejuvenate me, to revitalize me. This is God's day and God's time. And so remember, it also says keep it holy. That means set it apart, consecrate it, sanctify it. Make sure that it's something that you put into your regular habit. And so as I bring this sermon to a close, just before I do. So if I could put the commandment another way, it would be this: actively set apart a special day for rest and dedication to God. Let me read it again. Actively set apart a special day for rest and dedication to God. If you're a shift worker and you work on a Sunday, actively set apart a special day for rest and dedication to God. Most of us, the weekend, we are able to be here on a Sunday. Well, you are anyway. Actively set apart a special day for rest and dedication to God. And so from this 4th commandment, I want to say that God has given us 2 gifts. One is spiritually. It was a shadow pointing forward to the reality that we have now discovered in Jesus Christ. He is our forever Sabbath rest. But physically and mentally, God instituted a weekly 6-day, 1-day rhythm that recalibrates, it restores, it refreshes, it revitalizes. It's a time to cease. It's a time to worship, and it's a time for community. And that's what you see in the New Testament. They ceased, they worshiped, and they had community. And so let me close with a verse and then I'm handing over. Psalm 116:7, return to your rest, my soul, for the Lord has been good to you. Thank you.
I hope that message blessed you today and spoke into your life and your situation.
And if you would like to connect with us, please do head to our website, www.revive.online. There are so many ways that you can be a part of our community. And if you would like to partner with us to help us get the message of Jesus Christ out, please do head to the website. There are many options for you to give.
And if you enjoyed that message, can I encourage you, like it, subscribe to the channel so you can stay up to date with all the content coming out of our church. We know this content helps people all around the world, and so we pray that it blesses your life.